So, what we're going to discuss today is about the science content, and my part is about the core learning area standard and key stage standard. So, the core learning area standard for science K-12 curriculum is focused on making the student present an understanding about the basic concepts of the scientific ideas and the usage of the science inquiry skills in real-life situations. As they solve problems, they will possess the scientific attitudes and values. From kindergarten to grade 3, the key standards for the learning areas in science is the students to have acquired a scientific knowledge by being curious or being observant of the things around them. From grade 4 to grade 6, the key standard of science learning areas includes the students to be able to develop scientific inquiry skills like performing investigations and using the appropriate tools in conducting it. From grade 7 to grade 10, the key standard for science learning areas includes the students' development of scientific, environmental, and technological literacy that could help them in choosing decisions that are deemed rational. From grade 11 to grade 12, the key standard for science learning areas is that students should be able to have skills that can be used in obtaining useful technological and scientific information from different sources about the issues that are globally what?
Good day everyone. So for today, I'll be discussing to you guys the content of the grade 3 and grade 4 in the science content. So in the first quarter, they have the properties, the characteristic of solid, liquid, and gases. They also have changes that materials undergo. In the second quarter, they have living things under environment. So it more focuses on the living things. They also have animals, plants, heredity, inheritance and variation, the ecosystems. And in the third quarter, they have force and motion, and energy, light, and sound. And in the fourth quarter, they have earth and space. It more focuses on the surroundings, the weather, natural objects in the sky. So in grade 4, in the first quarter, they have the matter, the properties used to group and store materials, importance of interpreting product levels, and proper disposal of waste, changes that materials undergo, changes that are useful and harmful. That's all in the first quarter. So in the second quarter, they have living things under environment, parts and functions of humans, its major organs, caring and diseases that affects major organs, parts and functions of animals, live on land or in water, parts and function of plants, live on land or in water, heredity. Also they have inheritance and variation, life cycles of humans, animals, and plants, ecosystems, beneficial and harmful interactions. In third quarter, they have force and motion, effects of force on objects, shape, size, and movement, light, heat, and sound. And in the last quarter of the grade 4, they have earth and space. They also have soil, types of soil, water in the environment, its sources and importance, weather, components and weather instruments. The last one is the sun, its importance, effects on living things, and safety precautions. That's only. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So for grade 5, in the first quarter, the topic is about matter, the properties, useful and harmful materials. For the second quarter, Living Things and Their Environment, which tackles about the parts and functions of humans' reproductive system, parts and function of animals and plants' reproductive system, and modes of reproduction. Last is ecosystem interactions among living things. So for the third quarter, force and motion. Motion measuring the time and distance using standard units. Light and sound, heat and electricity. Electricity and magnetism. For the third quarter is earth and space. The processes that shape Earth's surface, weather disturbances, the moon, and patterns of stars. So for grade 6, in the first quarter, matter, the properties, mixture and their characteristics, and separating mixtures. For the second quarter, living things and their environment, which tackles about the parts and functions of human body systems, animals, the vertebrates and invertebrates, plants, reproduction of non-flowering plants, and ecosystems, interactions among living things and tropical rainforests. For the third quarter is about force, motion, and energy, which tackles about the gravitation and frictional forces, the energy transformation in simple machines. So for the fourth quarter, Earth and space, the forces that affect changes on the Earth's surface, weather patterns in the Philippines, motions of the Earth, and the last is the solar system.
Hello everyone, this time I will be discussing the sequence of domain or the strands for quarter in grades 7 and 8. But let's start first on grade 7. Here, their first quarter focuses mainly on matter, where learners undergo scientific investigation where they can acquire knowledge and solving problems in different ways. They will also tackle the diversity of materials in the environment, such as the solutions, the mixtures and substances, the elements and compounds, the acids and bases, and the last topic in their first quarter is the metals and non-metals. So moving on the second quarter of the sequence of domain in grade 7, the living things and the environment is their main focus. Here, the learners will identify the parts and functions of microscope. They are going to evaluate the levels of biological organization, the difference between animals and plant cells, and they will also study about fungi, bacteria, and protists, and the heredity, inheritance, and variation. And the last topic in their second quarter is the ecosystem, where they're going to explain the biological relationship of symbiotic and non-symbiotic organisms, and they're going to describe how energy transfer from one level to another level of the organisms. So next is the third quarter. Here, the third quarter in grade 7 talk about force, motion, and energy, where learners are going to describe motion in one dimension. The descriptors of motion, the speed or velocity, distance or displacement, acceleration, and motion detectors. And followed by the wave, its types, characteristics, amplitude, wavelength, and wave velocity. Followed by the sounds, its characteristics along pitch, loudness, and quality. And the light, its characteristics in terms of intensity or brightness and color. The heat, where the learners are going to describe the heat transfer in terms of conduction, convection, and the radiation. And the last topic in the third quarter in grade 7 is about electricity, its charges, and charging processes. So the last part, which is the fourth quarter, talk about the Earth and space, like the Philippine environment, interaction in the atmosphere such as the greenhouse effect and global warming, the seasons in the Philippines, its causes, and relationship to the position of the sun. And during this last quarter in grade 7, eclipses like the solar and lunar eclipse are also introduced. So that's it for the grade 7 sequence of domain or the strands for quarter. We're going to move on the grade 8 year level. Saying goodbye to the grade 7 as we welcome the grade 8 world. Here, their first quarter talk about force, motion, and energy, where they're going to identify the different laws of motion, saying goodbye to the grade 7 as we welcome the grade 8 world. Here, their first quarter talk about force, motion, and energy. Different laws of motion are tackled. The work, power, and energy, sound, light, heat, and electricity are all parts of the first quarter. So, moving on to the second quarter is all about Earth and space, where earthquake and faults are being studied, like the active and inactive faults, the how movement of faults generate earthquake, and how earthquake generate tsunamis. And they are also going to understand how typhoon develop.
Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. Today I'm going to discuss the different lessons of grade 9 and grade 10 from first quarter to fourth quarter, especially how learners can be able to learn and have first-hand experience from the different topics. Now, let's have first the first quarter, living things and their environment, respiratory and circulatory system working with the other organ system. The learners demonstrate an understanding of how the different structures of the circulatory and respiratory system work together to transport oxygen-rich blood and nutrients to the different parts of the body. The learners shall be able to conduct an information dissemination activity and an effective ways of taking care of the respiratory and circulatory system based on data gathered from the school or local health workers. The learners should be able to explain how the respiratory and circulatory system work together to transport nutrients, gases, and other molecules to and from the different parts of the body. Next, heredity, inheritance and variation, location of genes and chromosomes, non-Mendelian inheritance, incomplete dominance, sex-linked traits, and multiple alleles, multiple genes. The learners demonstrate an understanding of how genetic information is organized in genes on chromosomes and the different patterns of inheritance. The learner should be able to describe the location of genes in chromosomes and explain the different patterns of non-Mendelian inheritance. Next, biodiversity and evolution, causes of species extinction, natural and anthropogenic. The learners demonstrate an understanding of how changes in the environment may affect species extinction. The learners shall be able to make a multimedia presentation of a timeline of extinction of representative microorganisms, plants, and animals. The learners should be able to relate species extinction to the failure of population of organisms to adapt to abrupt changes in the environment. Another one, ecosystems, flow of energy and matter in ecosystems, photosynthesis, and respiration. The learners demonstrate an understanding of the structure and function of plant parts and organelles involved in photosynthesis, and structures and function of able to design and conduct an investigation to provide evidence that plants can manufacture their own food. The learners should be able to differentiate basic features and importance of photosynthesis and respiration. Now for grade 9, second quarter topic, we have matter. Chemical banding, ionic and covalent banding, and metallic banding. The learners demonstrate an understanding of how atoms combine with other atoms by transferring or by sharing electrons and forces that hold metals together. The learners should be able to explain the formation of ionic and covalent bands, recognize different types of compounds, ionic to covalent based on their properties such as melting point, hardness, polarity, and electrical and thermal conductivity. Explain properties of metals in terms of their structure, and explain how ions are formed. The variety of carbon compounds, carbon atoms, and organic compounds. The learners demonstrate an understanding of the type of bonds and carbon forms that result in the diversity of carbon compounds. The learners should be able to explain how the structure of the carbon atoms affect the types of bonds, its forms, and recognize the general classes and uses of organic compounds. Next one is mole concept. Mass, moles, percentage compositions of a compound. The learners demonstrate an understanding of the unit mole that quantitatively measures the number of very small particles of matter. The learners shall be able to analyze the percentage composition of different brands of two food products and decide on the product's appropriate percentage composition. The learners should be able to use the mole concept to express mass of substances and determine the percentage composition of compound given its chemical formula and vice versa. Another grade 9 topic is Earth and Space. Volcanoes type of volcanoes, volcanic eruption and energy from volcanoes. The learners demonstrate an understanding of volcanoes found in Philippines. The learners should be able to describe the different types of volcanoes, differentiate between active and inactive volcanoes, explain what happens when volcanoes erupt, and illustrate how energy from volcanoes may be tapped for human use. Another one is climate, factors that affect climate and global climate phenomenon. The learners demonstrate an understanding of factors that affect climate and the effects of changing climate and how to adapt accordingly. The learners shall be able to participate in activities that reduce risk and lessen effects of climate change. The learners should be able to explain how different factors affect the climate of an area and describe certain climatic phenomena that occur on a global level. Another one is constellations, characteristics of stars, arrangement of stars in a group, changing position of constellation during the night and at different times of the year, and beliefs and practices about constellations and astrology. The learners demonstrate an understanding of the relationship between the visible constellation in the sky and Earth's position along its orbit. The learners shall be able to discuss whether or not popular beliefs and practices with regard to constellation and astrology have scientific basis. The learners should be able to infer the characteristic of stars based on the characteristic of the sun. Infer that the arrangement of stars in a group or constellation does not change. Observe that the position of a constellation changes in the course of a night, and show which constellation may be observed at different times of the year using models. The last one for fourth quarter topic, we have force, motion, and energy. Motion in two dimensions, projectile motion, impulse, momentum, and impulse and conservation of linear momentum. The learners demonstrate an understanding of projectile motion, impulse and momentum, and conservation of linear momentum. The learner shall be able to propose ways to enhance sports related to projectile motion. The learners should be able to describe the horizontal and vertical motions of projectile. Investigate the relationship between the angle of release and the height range of the projectile. Relate impulse and momentum to collision of objects. Example, vehicular collision. Infer that the total momentum before and after collision is equal, and examine effects and predict causes of collision, related damages or injuries. Work, power, and energy. Changes in form of mechanical energy and conservation energy. The learners demonstrate an understanding of conservation of mechanical energy. The learners shall be able to create a device that shows conservation of mechanical energy. The learner should be able to explain the energy transformation in various activities, such as waterfalls, archery, amusement rides, perform activities to demonstrate conservation of mechanical energy, and infer that the total mechanical energy remains the same during any process. Heat, work, and efficiency. The learners demonstrate an understanding of the relationship among heat, work, and efficiency. The learners shall be able to analyze how power plants generate and transmit electrical energy. The learners should be able to construct a model to demonstrate that heat can do work, infer the heat transfer can be used to do work, and that work involves the release of heat. Explain why machines are never 100% efficient, and explain how heat transfer and energy transformation make heat engines like geothermal plants work. Last one is electricity and magnetism. Power generation and energy losses and transmission and distribution of electrical energy from power plants to home. The learners demonstrate an understanding of generation, transmission, and distribution of electrical energy from power plants or hydroelectric, geothermal, wind, and nuclear to home. The nuclear learners should be able to explain how electrical energy is generated, transmitted, and distributed.